So the first thing that everybody always asks is about the Unit 1B test, how many questions are on each thing. So there are 3 actual parts. So remember, we are going to be AKS, standards-based grading. So that means that you're going to have 3 different AKS that you've got going on. So in the first part, you're going to have 7 questions, and it's going to be over adding, subtracting, multiplying complex numbers. On AKS 57, that's going to be 5 questions long, and that's over that dividing and conjugates. So a lot of these questions are going to look like simplify, and it's going to have like some fraction with like dividing complex numbers. Okay. On AKS 5960, that's going to be your rational to radical exponents. So just keep that in mind. And we're going to go over some of these problems in particular because I know these are little things that I need you to have before you start looking at this review. Is with adding and subtracting and multiplying. Adding, you're just combining your numbers. You're combining real together and then you're combining imaginary together. So anything that's just a number, you're going to add together. You always want to make sure that you write it out in standard form. So that's that real plus or minus, depending on what the sign is, imaginary number. Okay, don't put your imaginary number first. Then it is incorrect. Okay, so make sure that you put it in standard form. Subtraction, make sure that you pay attention to that negative sign. I personally like to highlight my negatives just so I know, hey, there's a negative coming up. If you have a problem that has parentheses in the front and then parentheses in the center, distribute that negative to everything that's inside that parentheses. So keep that in mind. With multiplication, the big takeaway is that I squared equals -1. A lot of people were making mistakes with that. You've got to make sure that you put that in, okay? And the reason why I squared is -1 is because our I is the square root of -1. Remember, this came about when we started doing the quadratic formula and we got a negative underneath the radical. Once you multiply everything out, you're going to combine your like terms. Okay, so essentially you should end up with something that has a plus or minus bi. If you don't, or if you still have an I squared, then it's wrong. Okay? Last thing, just big takeaways, dividing or simplifying. You got to know what the conjugate is. The conjugate is taking your complex number and changing the sign of the imaginary term. Okay? If it's positive, you're going to make it negative. If it's a negative, you're going to make it positive. That is what the conjugate is. Okay? Multiplying, dividing, what you're going to do here are the different steps. You're going to multiply by the conjugate first, combine your like terms in the top and the bottom, substitute I squared equals -1, and then you're going to simplify. Okay? And I know I make that look really easy, but you're going to see these steps in just 1 second. That rational to radical exponents, here are your rules. I know it's a little fuzzy, couldn't get a better picture, but if you just go into Google and you type exponent rules, these will come up. Okay? But you need to know the product rule. The product rule says if you have the same base, you can add the exponents. If you are taking a power and raising it to a power, you're going to multiply the exponents. If you're dividing them, you're going to subtract the exponents. And if you have a negative power, you're going to flip what your base is. And the 0 exponent rule, this is my favorite one. Anything raised to the 0 power is 1. And again, you can find this anywhere on Google. I personally would have these written down when I'm doing these problems. Just saying. Okay? Another big takeaway is the fact that anything raised to the 1/2 power is like taking the square root. Anything raised to the 1/3 power is taking the cubic root. We talk a lot about this little number being in the little cubby hole right here. You got to make sure that you understand whatever the number is down here at the bottom, that's what's going to go in here. Okay? For instance, if I have x to the 1/4 power, that's like taking the 4th root of x. Okay? I also want to make it very, very clear that 3 square root of x is not the same thing as taking the 3rd root of x. You have to be intentional when you're writing these things. These are not the same thing. Okay? All right. So, okay, so these are a little bit out of order just because I want to hit some of the important stuff earlier on. So this is question 15 from your review. So it says simplify the expression. Okay, so we've got this a to the fourth, b to the third squared. Now, we learned from our power rules, okay, we've got a power of power. So that means that we're taking an exponent and we're raising it to another exponent, which means that we're going to multiply those numbers together. But if we do it to one term, we have to do it to the other. So a to the fourth power squared, so a to the fourth power squared, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply those exponents. That's going to be a to the 8th. But we've got this b to the third chilling right there too. So if we take b to the third and raise it to the second power, we're going to multiply those exponents. So that's going to be b to the 6th. And which one is that like? B. Okay? This one, a lot of people freak out about, but I'm going to be honest with you, you're going to see this on your SAT. Okay? And you're also going to see this a little bit in like pre-cal, and a little bit in calculus, maybe even in physics. So, I don't know about physics. We'll take that back. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I personally like to separate these into the different variables, okay, because there's a lot going on. So we've got a to the negative third over a to the 8th, and then we have b to the second power over b to the first, and then we also have c to the negative second and c to the negative fourth. Okay, so we've kind of separated them, and we're going to put them back together at the very end, but we're going to do some finessing first. So the first thing I'm going to notice is that there's this negative chilling out here in this exponent. Okay, we know that if there's a negative, we're going to flip the fraction. Okay, now we're not going to flip everything, we're just going to move this a to the third down to the bottom. Okay, so we're going to move this a to the third down to the bottom, which means all that's going to be left in the top is this 1. So we've got a to the third and a to the 8th. Well, now this just becomes the product rule. So we're going to add those exponents together. So we're going to have 1 over a to the 8 plus 3, which is 11. Okay? On this one over here, we've got the quotient rule going on. So we're going to take our exponents and we're going to subtract them. So we've got b to the second and b to the first. So what's 2 minus 1? Well, that's just 1, so that's going to be b to the first. This last part is a little tricky. You've got 2 negatives, one in the top and one in the bottom, which means what you're going to do is you're just going to kind of flip them from where their position is. So what's in the bottom is going to go in the top. What's in the top is going to go in the bottom. So it's going to look like this. C to the fourth over C to the second. Well, now this becomes a quotient rule, right? So we're going to subtract those exponents. 4 minus 2 is going to give me C to the second in the top. So now we have 3 different pieces, and we kind of have to put them all back together. Okay? So we've got a to the 11th in the bottom, b to the first in the top, and c to the second in the top. So let's squish them all back together. So we've got b to the first, c to the second, and then a to the 11th. And that's not what oh, no. Okay. Solid. That's not a choice. Okay. So I don't see the answer choice here, but this is how you do it. Okay? Question on that? So on number 17, we've got a quotient rule, which means that we're going to subtract those exponents. Okay, so 15 minus 9 is going to give us 6. So 15 minus 9 is going to give us 6. So we're going to have x to the 6th power. Okay, number 18 looks like a hot mess. Okay, so bear with me on this one. Okay, you kind of have to take it piece by piece. So the first thing that you're going to do on 18 is I would go ahead and simplify the fraction that's out front. So we've got 4 over 18. Well, what are they both divisible by? They're both divisible by 2, right? Okay, so I'm going to get 2 over 9. All right? And then I want to look at my x's. I've got x to the 5th, and I got x to the negative 3rd power. So this negative 3rd power is going to move up to the top, because remember, our negatives are going to flip over wherever the division line is. So this now can be 2 over 9, x to the 5th, and x to the 3rd. And now that becomes a product rule, right? So we're just going to add those exponents. So we've got 2/9 x to the 8th so far. Okay? So now we're going to actually look at our y values. We've got y to the negative 3rd and y to the negative 4th. So y to the negative 3rd and y to the negative 4th. Those negatives mean I'm going to flip them to the other side of the division line. So really, this is going to be y to the 4th over y to the 3rd. But we know that that now becomes a quotient rule, right? So we can actually subtract those exponents. So I can rewrite this whole thing as 2x to the 8th, y to the 1st, or just y, over 9. With me? Okay, and so the last piece, we've got z to the 6th and z to the 10th. Okay, so that's just a quotient rule. We're going to subtract. So what's 6 minus 10? Well, that's negative 4. Well, if we put a negative 4 in the top, we still have to move it to the bottom, right? So really, this is just going to be z to the 4th power right here. Now, I don't know if y'all noticed, but there's this squared chilling out here. That's the last thing that we want to do. So everything that's inside, we're going to take it and we're going to square it. So you have to take each piece and actually square it. So 2 squared is 4. X to the 8th squared is going to be x to the 16th. Y squared is going to be y squared. Over 9 squared, which is 81. Z to the 4th squared is z to the 8th. Okay?